7 Sins that Send Souls to Hell, a wake-up call from Saint Faustina. If your soul were weighed tonight, would it rise in mercy or fall into judgment? This is not a question for the curious, it's a question for the living. Because eternity isn't a theory, it's the destination. And the path you walk, every single day, is shaping your soul's final address. Saint Faustina Kowalska, a humble Polish nun, was given a terrifying gift, a glimpse into the fate of souls. Jesus didn't just speak to her of love and mercy, he showed her the tragedy of hell and the sins that drag souls there. This wasn't folklore, this was truth, burned into her heart through visions, revelations, and unbearable sorrow for the lost. She saw people who looked just like us, some even religious, spiraling into eternal darkness because they clung to sins they refused to surrender. This message isn't for someone else, it's for you. For anyone who's grown numb to sin, who's excused it, justified it, baptized it in good intentions, or quietly buried it in secret, there are 7 sins, 7 deadly pathways that continue to lead countless souls into ruin, not just centuries ago, not just in distant lands, but now, today. As you listen, I urge you, don't harden your heart. Let the words of Saint Faustina shake the silence. Let them call you back. Because this is more than a warning, it's a cry from heaven. A plea to return before it's too late. Number 1. Pride, the root of all sin. Pride is not just the first sin, it is the soil in which all other sins grow. Lucifer, once a radiant angel, fell because of it. Adam and Eve in paradise were deceived by its voice, and today, in homes, churches, schools, and nations, pride continues to disguise itself as self-worth, independence, or ambition, yet underneath it remains the quiet rejection of God's authority. Saint Faustina wrote in her diary that pride is one of the most common reasons souls are lost. In her visions, she saw how this sin blinds the heart to grace. Souls so full of themselves that there is no room for God. Some were deeply religious on the outside, praying, working, even receiving the sacraments, but in their hearts they exalted their own opinions above the truth. They refused correction, clung to their own righteousness, and silently resisted the gentle promptings of the Holy Spirit. Pride is not always loud. Sometimes it is polite, quiet, and deeply spiritual in appearance, yet it's still deadly. Jesus told Faustina that he draws close to the humble but resists the proud. Not because he doesn't love them, but because they won't let him in. Pride builds walls between the soul and grace. It turns confession into a performance, prayer into manipulation, and holiness into self-glory. And worst of all, it convinces the soul that nothing is wrong. In our culture, pride is celebrated. Believe in yourself becomes a gospel of self-idolatry. Personal truth replaces divine truth. We live as if our emotions determine morality and our desires define reality. And God, if mentioned at all, is reduced to a background figure who supports whatever we've already decided. That is pride in its most dangerous form, the dethroning of God in favor of self. But the proud don't always look like rebels. Sometimes they're the ones who seem most devout, most moral, most correct. Yet they carry judgment, superiority, or a secret belief that they are better than others. Faustina saw this in her convent too. Souls who believed they had already arrived spiritually and so stopped growing. Pride always whispers, "You're fine, you know enough, you're better than them." And the moment we listen, the descent begins. God does not condemn the proud because he hates them, he weeps for them. But he cannot force humility onto a heart that still grips control. That's why he calls us gently, but firmly, to recognize our nothingness, not to hate ourselves, but to see clearly that every breath, every grace, every good thing is from him, that apart from him we are dust. The medicine is humility, not the performance of it, but the truth of it. To bow the heart, to ask for help, to admit weakness, to stop pretending we are the center. Jesus told Faustina, "The greater the sinner, the greater the right he has to my mercy." But only the humble ask for mercy. The proud believe they don't need it. This is why pride is the root of all sin. It locks the door from the inside, and until we open it in humility, grace will stand outside waiting. Number 2. Lust, the fire that burns eternally. Lust is a fire that promises warmth but leaves only ashes. It begins with a glance, a thought, a small compromise. But it quickly becomes a chain around the soul, pulling deeper with every indulgence. Lust feeds the senses while starving the spirit. It creates illusions of love, connection, and pleasure, but leads to emptiness, guilt, and if left unrepented, eternal loss. Saint Faustina saw the consequences of lust with terrifying clarity. In her diary, she writes of souls in hell who had refused God's mercy because they had given themselves completely to impurity. They had silenced their conscience so often that they could no longer hear the voice of God. Their desire ruled them, their bodies became their gods, and now their souls were imprisoned in fire, not because God had stopped loving them, but because they had stopped choosing Him. Lust is not just about physical acts, it's about the misuse of love. It takes what is sacred, the human body, created in the image of God, and turns it into an object for consumption. It reduces a person to a sensation. It strips the soul of reverence and dulls the heart to the dignity of others. What God designed for communion, lust twists into isolation, and in a culture that worships desire, it's easy to fall into its grip. We live in a world flooded with images, messages, and entertainment designed to inflame lust. It's sold to us as harmless, natural, even empowering. But Saint Faustina's visions remind us that no sin is small when it separates us from God. The problem with lust isn't that we desire too much, it's that we settle for too little. We chase counterfeit intimacy instead of true love. We choose pleasure over purity, appetite over sacrifice. Jesus told Faustina that many souls are lost because of sins of the flesh, not because they fell once or even often, but because they stopped fighting. They stopped asking for grace. They gave up the struggle and surrendered to slavery. That's what lust becomes, a spiritual captivity. And the longer it is fed, the stronger its grip becomes. But there is mercy. The soul enslaved by lust is not beyond redemption. God's love is greater than every fall. His mercy is stronger than any addiction. But it requires honesty, confession, a willingness to bring the sin into the light and ask for help. Lust thrives in secrecy, but it dies in truth. And every time we say no to temptation, even when we feel weak, heaven rejoices. Purity isn't just about denying ourselves. It's about choosing something greater. True love, lasting peace, and the joy of a clean heart. Saint Faustina didn't write these warnings to shame anyone, but to call every soul back to dignity, back to holiness, back to the God who created our bodies, not for destruction, but for glory. Lust leads to fire, but not the kind that warms. And yet, even in the ashes of failure, God can make something beautiful if we return to Him. The fire of lust may burn, but the fire of His love can cleanse. The only question is which flame we will choose. Number 3. Greed, the god of gold. Greed is more than wanting more. It is worshiping more. It whispers that we are what we own, that our worth is measured in possessions, status, and control. Greed doesn't care if you're rich or poor. It only cares that you believe you never have enough. And once that seed is planted, it grows into a god that demands everything while giving nothing. Saint Faustina saw the ruin greed brings to the soul. She wrote of people who became so consumed with wealth and material comfort that they had no time for God. Their prayers were hollow. Their charity was absent. Their eyes were fixed on earth, and they forgot eternity. In her visions, she saw souls who clung so tightly to money and power in life that they arrived at death empty and cold, chained to treasures that could not follow them into the next world. Jesus was clear. You cannot serve both God and mammon. Yet many try. We say we follow Christ while chasing financial security like it's salvation. We convince ourselves we're being responsible, but greed often hides beneath layers of justification. We tell ourselves it's for our families, our future, our freedom. But when we love money more than we love the poor, when we trust in wealth more than in providence, greed has taken root. It is a quiet sin, socially acceptable, even admired. Success is praised, ambition celebrated. But Faustina saw how these seemingly small attachments grew into chains that dragged souls away from grace. Some of the most tragic souls in her diary were not evil in the obvious sense. They were just distracted, too busy building empires on earth to prepare for heaven. Too concerned with gaining more to recognize that they were already losing what mattered most. Greed teaches us to hoard instead of give, to grasp instead of trust. It kills gratitude and fosters anxiety. No matter how much is gained, it is never enough. And slowly, the heart becomes hard, the spirit dry. It turns blessings into burdens and abundance into idols. And when the soul begins to worship the gifts rather than the giver, the descent is already underway. But Jesus offers a better way. The cure for greed is generosity. Giving breaks the chains. It resets the soul. It reminds us that nothing we have is truly ours. It is all gift, all grace, all temporary. Faustina herself lived in poverty, yet she was rich in peace because her treasure was not stored in vaults or accounts, but in heaven. She understood the paradox. The more we give, the more free we become. When the final hour comes, no amount of gold can buy another breath. The soul stands alone before God, stripped of every possession, and only one question remains: did we love? Did we use what we had to serve others or to serve ourselves? Greed always says later, but God says now. Now is the time to loosen our grip. Now is the time to give, to trust, to let go of the God of gold and return to the God of grace. Saint Faustina's warning is not about guilt, it's about freedom. The love of money is a trap, but Christ came to set captives free. What we release to Him, He multiplies. What we give away in His name, He remembers. And what we surrender out of love, He turns into treasure that no thief can touch. Number 4. Envy, the silent killer of joy. Envy is a poison that enters quietly and spreads deeply. It doesn't always shout or show itself in loud hatred. Most of the time it whispers. It hides behind polite smiles, shallow compliments, or silent comparisons. But its impact is deadly, because envy doesn't just want what someone else has, it resents them for having it. Saint Faustina understood the destructive nature of envy. In her diary, she recorded how certain souls, instead of growing in holiness, were consumed by jealousy over the gifts and graces others received. Some begrudged the blessings of their fellow sister. Others doubted God's justice when they saw someone else receive more recognition or success. This wasn't harmless emotion, it was a rot in the soul that blocked grace and bred bitterness. Envy twists our vision. It takes someone else's joy and makes it feel like our loss. It sees God blessing another person, and instead of rejoicing, it questions Him. It turns the good of others into a source of pain, and slowly, without even noticing, we begin to resent not only people, but God Himself. This sin is particularly dangerous because it thrives in secrecy. While sins like wrath or lust may be obvious, envy wears a mask. It hides in silent judgments, in constant comparisons, in the quiet bitterness we feel when others succeed. It disguises itself as fairness or justice or even humility, but its root is discontent with what God has given us. Envy is old. It was there when Cain killed Abel. It was there when Joseph's brothers sold him. It was in the hearts of the Pharisees when they plotted against Jesus. It has always opposed love because it cannot stand to see others elevated. It wants to be first, or at least not last. It wants what others have, even if it means their downfall. But Saint Faustina's revelations show that heaven is not a place of competition. The saints do not envy each other, they rejoice in each other's glory. Why? Because in heaven there is no lack, no comparison, no rivalry. Each soul is perfectly filled with God, and there is no room for jealousy. But here on earth, envy thrives in a heart that forgets this. It forgets that God's plan is personal, that his gifts are unique, and that our worth is not based on how we measure up to others. The cure for envy is gratitude and love. When we thank God for what he has given us and bless others for what he has given them, envy loses its grip. When we stop comparing and start celebrating, we begin to see with heaven's eyes. Saint Faustina often prayed for the grace to rejoice in the holiness and happiness of others. It was not always easy, but it made her soul light, free, and ready to receive more of God. Envy kills joy because it refuses to rest in what is. It always wants more, but not through holy desire, through resentment. And if we are not careful, it can lead us into deeper sins, slander, gossip, sabotage, even hatred. But God offers another way. He invites us to trust him, to accept our own path, and to bless those who walk beside us. There is no peace in envy, only noise, restlessness, and dissatisfaction. But the soul that gives thanks, that rejoices in the good of others, becomes wide enough to hold heaven. Saint Faustina did not become holy by being better than others. She became holy by desiring their good more than her own glory, and in doing so, she found a joy that no envy could steal. Number 5. Gluttony. The worship of pleasure. Gluttony is often misunderstood. It's not just about overeating or indulging in food. It's about the disordered pursuit of pleasure. It's the soul seeking comfort, satisfaction, or escape through the senses, instead of turning to God. Gluttony worships feeling good above all else. It resists sacrifice. It numbs pain. It replaces the cross with convenience. Saint Faustina witnessed the consequences of this sin in souls who had given themselves over to comfort and self-indulgence. In her diary, she wrote of people who no longer sought God's will but only what felt good. Their appetites ruled their choices. They no longer fasted, no longer prayed with intention, and slowly drifted into spiritual laziness. Their bodies were full, but their spirits were starving. The pursuit of pleasure had dulled their conscience and silenced the voice of grace. Gluttony does not only manifest in the obvious ways. It can show itself in constant snacking, excessive entertainment, endless scrolling, and the refusal to embrace discomfort of any kind. It teaches the heart to avoid anything painful or difficult. It whispers, "You deserve this," until discipline and self-control seem unreasonable, even cruel. But Jesus never called us to follow comfort. He called us to follow him, and his path was not easy. It was marked by fasting, sacrifice, and suffering. He did not feed every craving. He mastered them. He showed us that true freedom is not found in doing whatever we want, but in doing what is right, even when it hurts. Gluttony weakens the soul's ability to resist other sins. When we train ourselves to always say yes to the body's demands, we lose the strength to say no to temptation. This is why the saints, including Faustina, practiced fasting and self-denial, not because the body is evil, but because it must be ordered rightly under the Spirit, under grace. The stomach must not become the master of the soul. In her revelations, Faustina saw that souls attached to comfort often ignored the poor. They turned inward, obsessed with their own desires, and became blind to the needs of others. Their excess became a wall between them and mercy. Their refusal to sacrifice became a rejection of the cross, and slowly, without even realizing it, they began to live as enemies of the gospel. The cure for gluttony is temperance and sacrifice, saying no, even to good things, for the sake of something greater, choosing silence over noise, fasting from food, from screens, from distractions, not to punish ourselves, but to awaken the spirit. Each act of restraint strengthens the will. Each act of self-denial prepares the soul to receive more of God. Saint Faustina did not live in luxury. She embraced a simple, humble life. She accepted cold meals, uncomfortable beds, and exhausting tasks, not with resentment, but with love. And through that surrender, her soul was opened to deep, divine intimacy. She understood that temporary pleasures could never satisfy an eternal hunger. Gluttony wants to keep us on the surface, safe, comfortable, numb. But God calls us deeper. He calls us to hunger for righteousness, to thirst for holiness, to desire something far beyond what the senses can give. Pleasure in its proper place is a gift, but when it becomes our God, it leads us away from the only one who can truly satisfy. To worship pleasure is to forget the cross. But to surrender our cravings, to fast with love, to say no when the world screams yes, that is to choose Christ. And in that choice, the soul finds joy that no indulgence could ever match. Number 6. Wrath, the fire that consumes the soul. Wrath begins with a spark, an offense, an injustice, a wound. But when left unchecked, it becomes a wildfire. It consumes peace, destroys relationships, and blinds the soul to mercy. Wrath is more than anger. It is anger that refuses to be governed by love. It doesn't just react, it seeks revenge, control, and punishment. And in its wake it leaves broken hearts and shattered souls. Saint Faustina saw wrath in its full spiritual consequence. She wrote of souls in torment, souls who had carried rage and bitterness to their deathbeds. Some had been deeply wronged, yes, but instead of forgiving, they allowed hatred to harden their hearts. They refused to let go. They clung to their pain as a weapon, wielding it against others and even against God. And now, in eternity, that wrath had turned inward, becoming the fire that devoured them from the inside. Jesus warned her about the danger of unforgiveness. He made it clear that divine mercy flows only through hearts that are willing to forgive. Not because God is limited, but because wrath blocks the way. It closes the door. A soul filled with vengeance has no space left for grace, and if we carry wrath to the grave, we risk carrying it into judgment. Wrath shows itself in different forms, some loud and explosive, others cold and silent. Some scream, some seethe, some lash out in violence, others destroy with words, silence, or isolation. But in every case, wrath poisons love. It twists justice into cruelty. It hides behind the idea of fairness, but underneath, it feeds on the desire to hurt back. We live in a world quick to rage. Social media has become a breeding ground for wrath, disguised as righteousness. Outrage is rewarded, bitterness is normalized, and forgiveness is seen as weakness. But Christ never told us to hold grudges. He told us to love our enemies, to bless those who curse us, to forgive 70 times 7. And he didn't just say it, he did it. From the cross, with torn flesh and mocked dignity, he forgave the very people who crucified him. Saint Faustina followed that same path. In her diary, she records moments of deep betrayal, misunderstanding, and pain. But instead of lashing out, she chose mercy. She prayed for those who hurt her. She offered their offenses to God. She didn't allow anger to rule her. Her strength wasn't in retaliation. It was in surrender. Wrath may feel powerful in the moment, but it leaves the soul exhausted and empty. It promises justice, but delivers destruction. It tells us we are protecting ourselves, but in reality it locks us in a prison. The longer we hold on to anger, the more it shapes us. And one day, if we are not careful, it becomes who we are. The cure for wrath is forgiveness. Not because others always deserve it, but because we were forgiven first. Forgiveness is not a denial of pain. It's a refusal to let pain have the last word. It is releasing the debt into God's hands, trusting Him to be the perfect judge. And it is remembering that we too have been forgiven more than we will ever be asked to forgive. Wrath is the fire that consumes the soul, but love is the fire that saves it. God's mercy can extinguish even the deepest anger, but only if we let Him. The choice is ours, to burn with rage or to burn with mercy. Saint Faustina's life and her visions show us which fire leads to heaven and which one leads to hell. Number 7. Sloth, the slow drift to damnation. Sloth doesn't shout. It doesn't shock. It slips in quietly and gently pulls the soul away from God. Unlike pride or wrath, sloth is not explosive. It is slow, subtle, and deadly. It is the spiritual laziness that says later. It avoids effort. It shrinks from sacrifice. It hides behind excuses and distractions until the heart grows numb and the will grows weak. Saint Faustina saw how sloth destroyed souls not through dramatic rebellion, but through neglect. She witnessed people who had known the truth, felt the call of God, even experienced moments of grace, but they did nothing. They delayed repentance. They postponed prayer. They ignored the small daily invitations to grow in holiness. And slowly their souls withered. They drifted. They stopped seeking. And when death came, they were unprepared. Sloth is not just being tired. It's not about needing rest or having a quiet day. It's a refusal to rise when God calls. A soul suffering from sloth finds 1,000 other things to do besides pray. It chooses comfort over virtue, entertainment over silence, and distraction over reflection. It avoids confession, delays forgiveness, and leaves conversion for another time. And that's the lie. There will always be more time. Sloth convinces the soul that tomorrow will be better, easier, more convenient. But tomorrow is not promised. And each day we delay grace, we grow colder to it. The voice of God becomes faint, the heart becomes heavy, and the soul begins to drift, not in one great fall, but in small, unnoticeable steps. Saint Faustina warned that many souls were lost, not because they hated God, but because they ignored Him. They were lukewarm. They lived as if faith was just a background detail, something to revisit when life slowed down. But Jesus, speaking to Faustina, said that lukewarm souls cause Him more pain than open enemies. Because they know Him, they just don't care enough to love Him fully. Sloth infects the soul with spiritual indifference. It says God is there, but He'll understand if I don't try too hard. It turns prayer into a burden. It leaves the Bible closed. It skips Mass, not out of rebellion, but because of convenience. And eventually the soul becomes too weak to choose heaven, too numb to desire holiness. But there is a cure. It begins with movement. Even the smallest act of prayer, the smallest act of love, begins to break the grip of sloth. Rising when we don't feel like it. Praying when our hearts are dry. Choosing silence instead of noise. Saying yes to God, even in the little things. These are the first steps back to life. Saint Faustina lived with illness, exhaustion, and deep suffering. Yet she never allowed sloth to steal her mission. She chose to love, to pray, to write, even when everything in her body wanted to rest. She knew that each moment was a gift, each act of faith was eternal, and she never allowed the slow drift to begin. Sloth wants you to wait, but God is calling now. The soul that responds, even weakly, is never alone. Grace will meet you in the effort. Heaven will come to the one who knocks. But we must rise. We must act. We must choose God over ease every single day, because the drift to damnation is slow, but it's real. And the only anchor strong enough to stop it is love that moves. The 7 sins revealed to Saint Faustina weren't shared to crush us, but to wake us up. These sins, pride, lust, greed, envy, gluttony, wrath, and sloth, are not just moral failings. They are soul-destroying paths, traps that lead countless people away from the mercy of God and toward eternal separation from Him. And the most dangerous thing about them is how normal they can seem. They don't always appear dark or violent. Sometimes they look like ambition, self-care, or even justice. But beneath the surface, they pull the soul further from grace. Saint Faustina didn't deliver these warnings from a place of condemnation. She spoke from love. She saw the fate of the unrepentant and couldn't stay silent. Her message was urgent, not harsh. Her heart was heavy, not proud. And in all of it, she pointed to the one hope that never fails, divine mercy. No matter how deep we've gone into sin, no matter how long we've drifted, it is not too late. If you still breathe, you still have time to turn back. Confession, prayer, fasting, and surrender are not burdens, they are lifelines. God is not waiting to punish you. He is waiting to restore you, but He will not force your heart open. He invites. And now that invitation is in front of you. If this message stirred something in you, don't ignore it. Don't put it off. Go to confession. Open the Bible. Begin again. The same Jesus who spoke to Faustina is calling you now. And if you're hungry for more content like this, truth that convicts, encourages, and draws you deeper, make sure to subscribe to Bible Talks. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and let the Word of God continue to transform your life. Heaven is real. Hell is, and the time to choose is now.